High Representative will brief you about the discussions, the outcomes, as the chair of the meeting, and then we will take a few questions both from the journalists here in the room and also from journalists who are connected via Zoom, of course with the preference to those ones of you who are here in the press room. High Representative, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, this is the last Foreign Affairs Council meeting before the summer holidays. We hope it's going to be the last one. But the last 2 summers has been very much troubled by different events. Last year, remember, it was Afghanistan. And this year, the war in Ukraine continues. Today, the fact has been devoted mainly to discuss about the Russian aggression against Ukraine, also about Latin American and Caribbean relationship, and other issues I will briefly mention. We got a video conference with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, who joined the Foreign Affairs Council. On the first point, he briefed us about the latest developments in the Russia aggression against Ukraine. His description shows that the situation in the ground continues being dramatic. It's worsening day by day. Russia continues launching missiles, targeting civilian infrastructure, causing dozens of civilian deaths every day. We are terrified by the violence of the Russia aggression against civilian people in Ukraine. And there are also disturbing reports about the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war by the Russian troops. Russia continues to target fields and food stocks. Everybody has seen the images of wheat fields being burned. They continue blocking the exports from Ukraine. They are responsible for the hunger in the world. Russia is trying to destroy Ukraine and the Ukrainian nation, and at the same time unleashing a global food and energy crisis. The ministers were unanimously agreeing on the need to continue stand firmly with Ukraine and to lend Ukraine with all our support in its fight for freedom and independence. Ukraine needs more arms. We will provide them. The war will continue. We will continue supporting. And that's why I have proposed the next tranche of the European Peace Facility, allocating 500 million more. It has been a political agreement on supporting this proposal, and the decision will be taken on the next days, but today the ministers agreed on that. We also continue our work on sanctions. A joint proposal from the Commission and the High Representative has put on the table more measures to close the loopholes and avoid that the existing measures can be circumvented, adopting new measures and trying to complete the whole architecture of these sanctions. These sanctions work. The Russian economy is severely affected. Certainly, it's not going to stop the war overnight, but the consequences of the sanctions will create a lot of economic trouble to Russia. We will continue supporting Ukraine on implementing the reforms agenda on its European perspective after Ukraine has been considered and granted the status of candidate country. We will hold the Association Council on the 5th of September after the summer break, and we are working on using this council to push the European perspective of Ukraine by implementing the required reforms. We have been discussing about the battle of narrative around who is guilty of what, and which are the causes and the consequences of the war. and about the reasons of the high increase on energy and food crisis. It's clear, for example, in the case of oil, that it's not the European ban on oil, on Russian oil, who has created this increase on oil price. Many people say that. Many people consider that on adopting sanctions, the European Union has created a problem, provoking an increase on the price of oil. That's completely false. The price of oil started increasing 1 month before the war. It was caused by the war. It has been peaked since the beginning of the war. And since we adopted sanctions, and since we banned the oil export from Russia, as you can see, the price of oil has decreased, reaching today the same level that just before the war started. I'm not saying that the bans on Russian oil has produced a decrease. No. But it's clear that watching at this graph, nothing can seriously say that the sanctions have produced an increase on the price of oil. With something, they have produced a decrease until reaching the same price that before the war. And this is part of the battle of narrative. A lot of people are saying things without putting evidence. And I think that behind each argument, it has to be a figure. It has to be an evidence, because otherwise, everybody can say whatever they want without having to provide the necessary proof that supports the argument. Then we want to discuss the relation with Latin America and the Caribbean. These countries are also affected by the negative consequences of Putin's war, in particular, once again, rising prices on global shortages of food, fertilizers, and energy, even if this region is one of the biggest producers of food in the world. The Latin American and Caribbean region is an important partner for a very important number of reasons, and we agreed to step up what we can call the other transatlantic relationship. Because when we talk about the transatlantic relationship, everybody thinks about the relationship with the US. There is another transatlantic relation, which is the relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean. The most important issues in which we have to invest more is to deblock the trade and association agreements with Mexico and Chile, in particular with Mexico, which is pending since the last 4 years. Member States strongly request to deblock this association and trade agreement. In fact, it's not a new association, it's just the modernization of an agreement that was signed 20 years ago. Same thing about Chile, although Chile is facing a referendum on its constitution in September. Let's hope that immediately after we can proceed to the signature of the modernization of the association and trade agreement with Chile. We agreed to hold a foreign ministers meeting during the Argentinian pro tempore presidency of CELAC in October in Buenos Aires. It will be an excellent opportunity to reinforce our partnership and to prepare a summit between the European Union and Latin American Caribbean region during the Spanish presidency in the second half of next year. Going to a more structural issue, we discussed about digital diplomacy and adopted an important conclusion on this topic. We are essentially launching our EU digital diplomacy as yet another foreign policy to support our geopolitical role and our ambitions in the global technological power game. Because digital issues are no longer just a matter of engineers, no longer technical matters, they are the battleground of technology, of values and narrative. The conclusions of this digital diplomacy we spell out in great detail what we mean in our participation in this technological battle. And in order to engage on that, we will open a dedicated European Union office in San Francisco, in the US, to enhance our digital diplomacy in and with the US. Going back to geographical issues, the ministers exchanged on the resumption of the Association Council meetings with Israel. They agreed that the Association Council is the highest forum for our bilateral relations. This Association Council has not met since 2012. The position of the European Union has not changed with respect to the Middle East peace process. We continue with the same Council conclusion of 2016, supporting the two-state solution. We know that the situation in the ground in the Palestinian territories is deteriorating, and I think that, and the ministers agreed, that this Association Council would be a good occasion to engage with Israel about these issues. The date will be agreed mutually with Israel, but first the European Union member states have to start working and to determine a common European Union position, as with any Association Council meeting. We also adopted conclusions on foreign information manipulation and interference, something very much related with our digital diplomacy. We see more and more how Russia is using disinformation and information manipulation. One example is that the cause of the price increase on oil is due to the EU sanctions, which you can see is not true at all. And this manipulation information is a strategic tool for Russia on its aggression against Ukraine. On energy and on food security, the Kremlin tries to target a coordinated action to manipulate the information environment, and this is a challenge for our security, our democracy, and our foreign policy. We agreed to start working on a toolbox that could allow us to impose costs for those who are trying to undermine our democracy, institutions, and processes through disinformation. Going back to geographical issues, we discussed about developments in Tunisia, especially in the run-up of the constitutional referendum on the next 25th of July. We touched upon the situation in Sri Lanka and about several issues related with the situation in East Congo and other parts of the world on any other business, where several member states already put on the agenda of September many issues which maybe during the summer will become worse, but that in any case will be our agenda for the next autumn. But as you can imagine, everybody is worried about what can happen in the Ukrainian front, on the military side and on the energy side. The Nord Stream 1 is still on repair. Let's see what's happening when this period reaches an end, and we will continue watching at the situation of gas supply, which is certainly the most important concern for our societies and economies.
Thank you. Now space for your questions. The first hand I've seen was here. Mira, you can go ahead. The microphones are on the right and on the left side for those of you who will ask afterwards. Y nosotros tenemos también interpretación.
We do have interpretation in Spanish. You can put your question in Spanish if you want to. Thank you very much. I will indeed. I have a question in 3 points. First point, what needs to be unblocked when it comes to Mexico, Chile, and Mercosur agreements, maybe Mercosur a bit later? Secondly, you've talked about this possible summit. Does that mean that the political tensions that made such events impossible for 7 years, does that mean they have been removed? And thirdly, what in concrete terms does the roadmap to 2023 sort of contain, if I may ask?
Tardaría mucho tiempo.
Well, to give you a detailed answer would take a long time. 3 questions in one. Now, you can't put everything on the same level. On one hand, the Mexico agreement for modernization updating, or the updating of the association agreement with Chile, or the one with Mercosur. The first 2 are updates. These are things that have been working for about 20 years. They have worked very well, but that need modernization, adaptation. Things were very different 20 years ago. In the case of Mercosur, though, it's a new agreement that doesn't exist yet that we're talking about. And it affects many countries at the same time, not just one. It's not just bilateral, therefore. And it contains a number of complications, evident ones, when it comes to, for instance, environmental and other concerns. We're going to focus on trying to kick off the ratification process for the agreement with Mexico. It's possible that some countries may wish to have some caveats on this or that, but nobody today said anything that could lead us to believe that in any way there's an actual objection by a member state to going forward on that. So it's more about procedures and about how we get through the ratification process. Having said that, procedure matters cannot go on stalling the process for much longer. On Chile, it's slightly different again. Chile is about to have a constitutional referendum in September. Everything depends on what happens there. It's a tryst for the citizens to take, and we'll have to wait and see what happens and then move on before the end of the year, because then it's going to be 20 years since the original agreement was signed, but we'll still have to wait to see. On Mercosur, as I said, it's a wee bit more complicated. There was an agreement in 2019, which now has to be adapted with environmental concern in particular. This will require some technical work, and that will be of some importance. I can't, in a few words, talk about everything that underpins our strategy, or indeed our desire to boost our partnership with Latin America and the Caribbean. After all, we're talking about a whole continent, not just one country, so I can't sum all of that up. But for many years now, China has been growing their role in the region. They're now the main trade partner for most countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We as Europeans have to be aware, and in particular be aware that nature abhors a vacuum, and we have to be more active. We have been very active in terms to investment, but not so much in political terms. The ministers have agreed today we have to do more, be more present, and talk about things like digital divide, combating inequality, but also environmental issues and all the other issues that have to do with the economic growth of this very important region. Europe has to be more present, and I can personally assure you that I will do everything in my power to that end. Thank you.
Use the mic on the right or on the left.
Hi, my name is Olena Abramovich. I'm a Ukrainian journalist. I work for Ukrainian media. High Representative, my question is, what is the, by assessment of European Commission, worst case scenario if Russia cuts off gas for European countries? What will be the biggest consequences for European consumers and economies? And the follow-up question after that is that, does that overweight those losses of lives and ruins that Ukrainians are suffering right now? Thank you.
You cannot put on the same level the losses of human life and the destruction that Ukraine is suffering. That's why we are engaged with Ukraine with all our capacity, providing military support, economic support, sanctions against Russia, financial support in order to avoid a big crisis of the Ukrainian economy facing the challenges of the war. On the energy side, on Wednesday, the European Commission will meet in order to discuss the situation and to take measures to prevent any possible scenario. I don't want to call for the bad times, but certainly we have to be vigilant because nobody knows what can happen this summer.
So,
speak loudly.
Yes, if Russia cuts off its European Union countries, are they ready for that? I mean, is this kind of disaster for the economy, or you have enough backup plans? It's interesting just to understand the situation, why those gas sanctions are not possible right now.
Nobody's talking about new sanctions. We are just talking about how can we face a situation in which the gas supply from Russia can be abruptly decreased. And we will be prepared for that. Certainly it's not going to be an easy scenario, but we should be prepared for that.
Thank you. La question suivante, Christian.
Christian, you asked for the floor.
Oui, bonjour. En fait,
yes, thank you very much. Well, money dictates wars, and I'd like to understand, with all the announcements that you've made today, what are you going to do now that money's running out? You've now released another tranche of 500 million euros for the European Peace Facility. We know that that means it's coming to the end of the line. I wonder if there was any debate. Are we going to put more money into the pot? Have we found new sources of financing? Are certain member states going to agree not to be reimbursed? Is there going to be a two-speed Europe between those who voluntarily deliver arms and others who want to be reimbursed up to the last cent? And my second question relates to macroeconomic aid. If I've understood properly, the European budget cannot provide financing of more than €1 billion. That's already been done. There's €8 billion outstanding, and the member states are being asked to put their hand into their pockets. The Germans have done so. They've put €1 billion on the table. Will other member states make similar announcements? And can we accept member states coming to Council and having to recognise that the Americans are doing more than we are? Well, listen, we've just given €500 million more. That's what we've just agreed. And you're asking me what will be the next stage. The next stage is for those €500 million to be spent. And once it has been spent, we'll see what comes next. Nobody spoke out against these €500 million. We've reached an agreement on how to reimburse costs under the second, third and fourth tranches. An agreement on that has now been reached. It's now up to all of the member states to cooperate. Everyone said and unanimously agreed that €500 million should be taken from the peace facility. It's not a bottomless pot of money, but so far we can continue to finance the financing that we have guaranteed to Ukraine. On the macroeconomic assistance, the Commission did announce €9 billion. So far, the Council has reached an agreement to disperse €1 billion, and we continue to work to find a way to disperse the other €8 billion. I don't have a date to give you now, but it remains on our agenda, and we will find a way to do it because we fully understand the macroeconomic difficulties that Ukraine faces, which are entirely normal. It's a war. Their revenue has collapsed. They have budget difficulties in times of peace. Imagine the situation in times of war. We will provide macroeconomic support to stabilize Ukraine because it is just as important as military aid.
Go ahead.
Sí, muchas gracias, Andrés Gil.
Thank you very much. From Radio Puntoes, Andrés Gil. High Representative, you've talked about the narrative and the energy crisis, the food crisis, and the issues of the narrative, but at the same time, these crises do exist. There is a food crisis, there is inflation, the economy is going to slow down the EU before the end of the year. So what do you believe, how much do you believe the population of Europe can accept in terms of this stress when it's hard and hard to fill your petrol tank of the car or to feed yourself, particularly if you're in a poorer section of society, and with this unhappiness burgeoning in the population, people who can't heat themselves, who can't pay for their electricity bills, how will the politicians be able to stand up to that pressure? Where do you think this is going and how will people react? Well, in answer to what you said, obviously any political person needs to have spend time thinking about the sort of things you just said. That's what politicians do. But this was a foreign ministers' council. It was a council that defines foreign policy and takes decision on foreign policy as it just did regarding the war in Ukraine, using the mechanisms that are at our disposal. Now, naturally, yes, energy prices have gone up, are going up. I mean, as I've showed with this slide, since January to now, obviously the price here went up. Ditto food prices. It's only natural, given the fact that 20 million tons of wheat cannot go to market. Obviously, that's going to push prices up in the market. These are consequences of the war. War have such consequences. Wars lead to these things. Now, luckily, we're not being bombed. We're not like the people of Ukraine. We're not being driven out of our homes. But the whole world is suffering from the consequences of a war, the consequences of the policies Putin is using to accompany his war effort. The war is being waged on the territory of Ukraine with weapons of war, but it is also being waged by blocking access of food to markets. European society has to be aware that this is a test we are being put to. It's an existential challenge. And we have to be tough enough to go on supporting Ukraine. We have no other solution. Neither do they.
Thank you. We go to the virtual space now to colleagues connected over Zoom. The first one I've seen was Lawrence. Lawrence, you can ask your question. Your mic should be open. It's open now.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thank you. Hi, Rep. I have a couple of questions. First of all, you were you spoke very strongly this morning, Hi, Rep, about people criticizing the sanctions. And I noticed you also had your blog yesterday calling for strategic patience. I wondered why the timing of this and to what extent you are worried that it's not just Viktor Orban now who is hesitating over sanctions and support for Ukraine, and whether you're worried that there is a broader European wobble on this issue. Second question to you on the Association Council. I noted you said there is no date, but my understanding is the intention is to do this before the Israeli elections on November the 1st. Is that your understanding as well? Thanks.
Yes, about the Association Council, one could consider that being the Israeli government a caretaker government, because they will be in the midst of an electoral process, it would be better to wait for another government that come out of the electoral process with a stronger political support. But member states and ministers almost unanimously decided that if we are able to agree on a common agenda and on a common position on the points of agenda, there was no need to wait until December or who knows when, because who knows when the next Israeli government will be formed. It's maybe 6 months or 1 year, no? Who knows? So the important thing is not the electoral process, that certainly is going to happen, and nobody knows which is going to be the result, and we don't want to interfere on the result, but the member states agreeing on the agenda and a common position on the agenda points. And on that, there is nothing different with other association councils. In all association councils, the European Union speaks with a single voice, saying the thing, saying the same. And now, from now on, we start with the process of building this common position, and I think it would be a good occasion to rethink about the Middle East peace process and the role and the position of the European Union with respect to it. As soon as we have a common position, we will try to agree with the Israeli side for a date. Not before. It wouldn't make sense to fix a date and afterwards to look for a common position. First thing first. First common position, secondly to fix the date. Your first question, certainly I am sure Putin is counting on the democratic fatigue. I'm sure. He believes that democracies are weak and the news hides the news. And look, no. The European societies cannot afford fatigue. The European societies and the European Union member states governments have to continue standing behind the decisions they have taken. They took the decisions on restrictive measures on the Russian economy, and they have to stick to it. And they have to keep putting pressure on the economics of Russia, knowing that it's not going to be a miracle solution. But we have to do that exactly at the same level that we support military Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, Natalia, is you have the mic just there.
Much for the question. I just want to follow up on the new sanctions measures that were discussed today. I understand that there are some exemptions for banks and other sanctioned entities when it comes to food and grain transactions. Can you explain a bit about why this was included in the new sanctions proposal and what impact that this should have on the growing food crisis?
The COREPER is working right now to complete the work on the new, call it restrictive measures, new package of adaptation or perfectionation of the existing measures. There is nothing new on changing the current restrictive measures with respect to the payments for food and fertilizers. Since the beginning, food and fertilizers were completely out of our package. No restrictive measures affecting the trade on food and fertilizers. It's perfectly possible for us that Russia sells and people buy food and fertilizers. No restrictive measures, no limit on the banking capacity to convey payments. If there are over-compliances, if there are market avoidances by some economic and financial actors, we are trying to explain to them that there is nothing in our restrictive measures that prevent from exporting and paying for food and fertilizers exports.
That was it for today. HRVP still has full agenda, so thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the interpreters, and if possible, have a nice summer. See you in Prague. Bye.
Bueno.